John is just an amazing leader. Your integrity and, you know, your ethics, and they just really speak to me. That's how I was raised by my father. And on top of that, he's an advocate for women and diversity, and just has a history, just lives it. You know, for John, I think it's natural.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think we're going to talk about things in the boardroom, which I think are extremely important, but I sent you material. We won't go through what should a good board do. So there's governance, there's participation, there's diversity. I don't want to cover that because you can read that in a book. I think when Michelle and I were talking, you know, what things are watch outs, or what things make you feel vulnerable, or what things are going on that you may not be aware of. And I think once you get through some of those experiences, you can be part of that game or that system as well. Does that make sense? So my background is small town in Missouri, family, all union construction workers, mainly pipe fitters, 5 kids, 3-bedroom house, no business week. My dad never had an investment. So for me to get into business, there wouldn't have been anything early on that would have indicated that I would have ended up there. And I was good at math, so I ended up going to the University of Missouri as a double-E. I couldn't have gotten hired at Newmont, I might add, because I didn't have a good enough grade point. I had some interest as you start heading towards the end of your career of what are going to be the next steps, and board work would be certainly one of those. And given the jobs that I had, whether those were in startups, turnarounds, or corporation, I sort of had a skill set that I felt I could go into a board room and be productive and feel like I was contributing. And I didn't want to be on a board where the seagull thing, you know what I'm talking about, fly in, leave something on the rock and fly away. So I was more of an operational person. So if I was going to go on a board, I wanted to have it feel like I was doing something good. And doing something good takes a lot of different forms. But there was no question that with no MBA, and mine was really on-the-job experiences, I had fears that I may not be good enough, or I would miss something, or I wasn't going to be able to talk about derivatives or whatever board people do. And so I tried to prepare, learn. So given the background I just described, and I'm sure most of you are this way, if I'm not smarter than the person, I'm going to try to outwork them. I'm going to try to get broader, deeper, so when we get into a meeting or something, I can hold my own, or at least I prepared to the best ability. So a lot of that is around board work and preparation. And some of what I put in here, and we can talk about real situations, because most of the things I put in here I can tie back to real examples, which I think will be beneficial. With what do you do, and particularly women, or minorities for that matter, of what happens in that first board meeting and things like that. Or how do I get on a board? So I have been involved in this effort by the Women's Vision Foundation to try to get women in position to at least be considered. And so my role was the middle market, what they call the middle market, but basically Fortune 5,000 to 1,000, and making calls to I wouldn't call Newmont, but I would call Dan Caruso at the phone company, where's my mind? But to call and try to find out what's your cycle on board members, who's rolling off, are you trying to expand, is there merger and acquisition, and try to get in a position so we knew when there was an opening, right? And the women groups are really kind of putting a LinkedIn kind of thing where you've got a roster of women with skills so that you can pluck people that are most applicable, like if they're mining, pull them up so that you have a best shot at getting in, because diversity is a big deal. So one of the things I talked about, and you heard me, is how do you really prepare and learn about a company. So one of the things, let's say you're going to interview, a technique, and it's a technique I think it can be used in a lot of ways. It could be used in sales if you're at the executive level, is you need to learn about the company. And learning about the company, one of the best ways to do that is not the annual report, which is fine, but it is, if it's public, earnings calls. So having had to do those earnings calls for 7 years, where we're covered by 27 analysts, is, and I'm going to make a recommendation that you do listen, because they're recorded, if it's public, 4 separate earning calls. So you're going to catch a fiscal year. And what you want to do is listen to the CFO and CEO, who generally are doing them, and listen to the adjectives and adverbs. How do they play off? And what are the 3 things they zero in on? So CEOs, and when you're in the boardroom, you need to get your mind disciplined around talk in terms of 3s. You may have 15 things to do, but it will be the top 3 priorities. What are the first 3 things you need to attack? So this sort of rules of 3. And in the boardroom or external communications, and you probably know that, if you start getting too complex, people will wander all over the place, but they'll remember the 3 things. In the case of a public company, there's such short-term pressure on earnings and the like that the earnings call will be really honed to what they believe they can deliver, what the investors in Wall Street are expecting, and what the analysts can count on, because they're going to do projections and the CEO's held to those. You need to go through several cycles to see how that plays out, because life isn't perfect.
Right.
Product launches are missed, tsunami hits, things get
Gold prices go down.
crazy stuff. Trade wars are announced. So listen to that. So you listen to the dynamic, and over time, you'll hear voices change, tone change, language change. Because if you think about it, for those of you who are on the public side, so let's just say it's January to March results. When is the earnings call usually done?
April.
End of April, because you've got results. What do you know when you're going to that earnings call? You've almost got 1/3 of the quarter done. So when you start talking about what's going to happen, you already have a pretty good idea on what 1/3 of it is, right? So listening to how do they set up the expectation, whatever it might be, product launch, acquisition, merger and acquisition, how did it go? They're already into it. So the tone and the flavor gives you an indication, like, I'm a little worried about this quarter, things are soft, it's too linear, whatever it might be. At the first earnings call and the subsequent ones, you got to hang on for the analysts. Now on the calls that come in from the analysts, you can prioritize who you listen to from the analysts. So almost always, the CEO, CFO, and the IR firm will have somebody who's most favorable to the company ask the first round of questions. And you only have a half an hour, depends on the size of the company. And they'll hear the call, it'll be, I'm really glad you asked that. That was really a great question. And you won't avoid the ones that are going to be more critical, but you put them at the end. Because if you don't put them in the end, they're ticked, and everybody knows how that works. But you want to listen to the favorable ones, and you want to hang on to the end and listen to the critiquing ones. If the CEO and CFO choose not to have them on there, it's generally purposeful, because the IR people are going to go, no, you got to get the other side of the, within reason. And if you do that over 4 quarters, you're going to start getting an idea about the priorities, goal setting, can they execute, and you'll hear it, you'll feel it, and you'll know the analyst. So getting ready to go into an interview as a board, it might be nice to know what those 3 are, what their difficulties are, and how you might be a problem solver, huh? Because you have a flavor for that. You can get things from the Q and the K, which are helpful, because you'll have things in there about what are my, when you go through the disclosure side of it, what are the opportunities and risks? And they'll they'll go out of their way to state the risks. And there's usually a little nugget in there somewhere. In mining, it could be environmental, Peru passing environmental things. If it's American Express, it's losing the Costco account, right? So you want to go look for that. And things you want to pay attention to are really the risks and the opportunities, and do they change? and look for the footnotes if they do, because they'll slide them in, because you want to see what changed here. And then to the extent that you're financial savvy enough, what are reserves? Are those reserves moving? So let's say it's mining, and you think you've got an unfair case where you had some discharge into a river. The accounting people, the outside auditors are going to say, you got to increase your reserves. And you go, I'm not going to increase, I'm going to win this case. But they go, no. You're going to start setting up reserves. So you kind of look for some of the things that could be early warning for you that there's some risks going into the company. A lot of R&D. Is R&D built up? When's the bubble for product? What are the product cycles? So if it's in technology, life cycle technology products is a year to 2 years. So if there's R&D, that product better hit because it's got a small window, and every time it's delayed, the margin gets crushed because there's right. So you sort of look for these sort of macro trends, and I think when you go in to interview and you're going to interview with board members, it isn't good enough to know, what's the history of the company, how is Harvey Golub as a leader, whatever. You want to kind of get a sense where can I help? Where can I help internationally? What about banking in Singapore? Safe harbor, put the money in Singapore, right? That kind of stuff. So come in knowledgeable, but come in, we're in a position to say, I can help you solve problems. Does that make sense? And you start separating yourself from the good old boys, because a lot of them are not going to rely on that. What happens, so I've driven having qualified women on boards, and what I mean by that is a good match. You always have audit, but if it's a Silicon Valley board and you've got some venture capital people on there and there's egos, you got to be ready to handle absurdity or irrationality, or they're firing for effect. You got to be calm under fire. Does that make sense? But also be ready to push back. So there's a personality fit that has to be there with boards, and not all boards are good. I mean, there are boards, I'll have women that say, well, geez, I want to get on a board to increase the diversity. If I wasn't on film, I'd name a company here in town, and I'd go, do you want that aggravation? Seriously? Just because you're on a board, life's too short, right? There are issues, and they could be, there could be risks. So the D&O insurance, there may be a legitimate reason why that's that. But you got to figure that out. Being on a board isn't always what it's cut out to be, right? It's got to be a good fit.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So, as you identify some of these problems, let's say losing Costco accounting American Express, what is the actual role that you can play at the board level versus the executive team has to be the one solving the problem? So where's the line in terms of solving the problem between leadership of the company versus the board?
Well, I'll use that as an example, and I'll make this up because I could be dead wrong. But let's just say that the Costco profile of the American Express card was a certain demographic, but that the Hispanic market or something, or the millennial market hadn't been explored, and somehow you had ties to say, let's save that business, but we can increase a new era of owners of our particular card. Does that make sense? Yeah. Or that we have a better way of doing frequent flyer American Express, Amex points that we can tie back to tangible goods that they could get things for. So I'm making that up, obviously, but where can you help that somebody who's been at the company for so long doesn't go down that path? Now, Amex has got a lot of people extremely qualified, and it's generally been a terrific board. So, but smaller companies don't always have that, and they tend to have their buds with it, and so there'll be more narrow thinking. And a lot of the boards, the CEO hires their friends. They didn't do a good job of hiring diversity when they were CEOs, and there's highly likely that when they're 70 years old, they're not going to change. So you'll see where you can begin to have an impact, and I think thoughtfully placed questions. I'm sure we've thought of this before. I'm sure this was under consideration, but I have some experiences, and if the board would be interested in hearing them, I'd like to offer them up And what you want to prepare is for when the questions come, that you can go down 2 or 3 levels of expertise about that and some experience. Does that make sense?
Yep.
It's something along those lines.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, does that help?
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? So I'll take more before we go on. No? So some of the things, and I'll go back when I'm done here and make sure I didn't miss any. I'll use, again, I'd use some people's names, but I can tell you that I was head of nominating and governance at a NASDAQ company that's since been acquired. And my job was to get a cohesive, active, vibrant, diverse board, which we did.
Nice.
It's not a single effort, it takes the whole board, but to be the initiator. And one of the things was, and particularly in Silicon Valley, everybody knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, correct? So every one of those high tech. So let's say that we were going to introduce cloud computing, and we felt like we needed, at this particular company, that cloud was an enabler for customers. Well, let's talk to Oracle, and let's go get that person. And it tended to be, in the tech world, still a white male dominated thing. So what you wanted to do is try to go find those candidates who could hold their own, and then get them in a position to pre-program them. So when they come in, you say, here's the personality you're going to be dealing with. Here's what I'd like for you to be aware of. You've got to use your own style. Here's the kind of questions that are going to come up. So you kind of practice before the game starts. Does that make sense? So this particular woman, who's gone on to another board that I helped, was friends from a previous job in the tech world at a large telecommunications company. I didn't realize how close they were. It was fine, but they were, she had worked in an organization that he was the chair and CEO. So, and we like her. So the first board meeting, she sits next to Bill. So they're talking, private conversation. They weren't talking during the meeting, but it was clear that they were pretty good friends. Then the next meeting, she sits next to Bill. Then the next meeting, she sits next to Bill. And I pulled her inside and said, you're not doing yourself any favor here. They think you're tied to Bill, so whatever Bill says, you're going to do the same. So whether you are independent or not, you're now being stigmatized by what you're doing. You need to move around. Sit in different places in the board. Sit by the CEO, sit up by the screen, be by the CFO. You got to change the game. You're telegraphing things that may or may not be true, but the perception is exactly what you're doing, that you're going to be aligned. And then when there's a tough decision and you align with them, they're going to say, I told you so. So don't do that. She goes, well, I went, no, listen to me. You need to move. you need to move. This is not really a debate. I want you to do well. And she ultimately thanked me because it was just different body language and different dynamics. Does that make sense? Telegraphing. So another one, and it happens to be with rookie board members, certainly with women. So you're presenting, you get to know the company a little bit, and the new VP of strategic marketing is a woman. And you like what she's done. Maybe you've researched what she's doing. You really like that they're going to do a new cobalt blue card. And she's talking in body language. It's good, you're happy, nodding heads, it's affirmation. It's almost a natural thing with women. I want to be supportive. I'm here to root you on. Then the old product manager comes in who's got some staid product that they're having to break will occur. You're going to have to vote to invest more money in refreshing a product. The board goes, I know where she's going to stand. She's going to vote no. And another woman, not in the different company, I said, they already know what you're going to do. She goes, I didn't say anything, John. I said, oh, you most certainly did. You gave it away body language. And so when you get into maybe tighter situations from a financial and accounting perspective, you communicate. So you got to camouflage it. Even if you are supportive, you need to, I don't want to say fake, but don't miss opportunities to show that you're balanced and people don't know where you're at. If you were playing, I'm not a poker player, but if you went to Las Vegas, you wouldn't be smiling if you had your cards in your hand, right? And then sad if they were bad, correct? It's the same thing in the boardroom. You have to be careful about that sort of situation. Does that make sense? So communicating. And then one of the other things, and I think you can read about this, but in the new generation of women, I don't like putting people in buckets, so let me say that. But it's the meeting before the meeting.
Yeah, I saw that.
Guys do that all the time. I don't care if it's a pickup basketball game. I played baseball at the University of Missouri, and you meet and figure out how you're going to help each other before the game ever starts. It's natural. You're inbred with that. You're inbred with that, and Red Rover, send somebody over. I mean, the guys automatically are trying to figure out how to win. They don't even like each other, but they try to figure out. So there is almost always a meeting before the meeting, and in committees and board meeting, they'll try to figure out, particularly the old guard, where you're going to sit on this situation. And if they don't ask you how you're going to vote, they'll have enough conversation. They go, here's where I'm steering this. Here's how this question flow is going to go. And I've had women come in and go, this thing was wired ahead of time. I go, no kidding. You know, you're not going to change that. Get in the flow. You can be part of that, helping to steer that kind of thing. And generate your own meetings. Now, comp committee, maybe audit committee, things like that. So there's a lot of that goes on about, you know, where do you fall on this comp issue, right? It's too much stock options for the CEO, whatever. So you'll have this dialogue. So you still are independent, but you want to get a sense for what's going on. And guys will do it all the time. That's a natural.
So what if you're in the meeting before the meeting and you have a completely different view than everybody else? Do you still play poker face?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because you're gonna do what you want to do.
Right. But you need to understand where they're going.
And you need to understand too that a good board's going to want unanimous decision. 6-1 votes don't work in the record.
So if you don't agree with them,
might abstain, they might push you, and they'll depending upon the board, let's talk about this. But particularly on large companies, it's the board unanimously. You see that in the documents, right?
Yeah.
So they're looking for unanimous, and there could be trade-offs. You might have to compromise. You may not be right, you know. And it generally is not around ethics or some big stuff about, you know, things that are really not they're gonna put the company in jeopardy. But they're gonna look for unanimous, and you need to get, if you are hard over here, you better be ready to defend, because the heat's gonna come as to why you're gonna do that. And the general counsel, outside auditors, it's gonna start raising red flags, because what do you put in the annual report? Is there something you know that I don't know? You know, is there an ethics issue? How come you're so staunch? I mean, so be prepared for that. And if you're going to stand your ground. But understand, you know, life is somewhat a series of compromises too. Does it fit within the context of what you're doing? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But it's meetings before meetings. You can start them yourself. The men will generally like it that you're trying to do that. But if you got something, test the waters. You test the hypothesis, right? Does that make sense?
And you may sway a couple of them in the meantime.
You may, yeah. Difference of opinion. You get a chance to debate. It's not in the record.